why he'd been given this award.
Yeah, because this was a private company, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he hadn't really done any work for the country that I knew of, but he wasn't particularly wealthy either.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole thing was quite strange. And what I learnt in the years to follow was that he was actually working for the British Foreign Service overseas, and because he was head of sales, as I said, he was very much a people person. You know, these are the perfect people that the military intelligence and political intelligence groups like to come and talk to ambassadors and people of this position.
Right.
So they employed him to actually kind of get connected and get on well with the people there. And then when he was made this Okakuro of Mosuga, he asked some of the other tribal elders if he could buy some of the land.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you know, he'd just done this great thing for the group, and gotten them all work and things. And so, yeah, they all sort of talked amongst each other and decided that they would definitely have some land for the new chief, the new Okakura.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a specific part of the land that he wanted. So it was about 40 or 60 acres part of this tribal land.
Mm.
And so, yeah, they agreed, no problem, and did quite a low price for him as well.
Mm-hmm.
And what the tribes didn't know was that underneath this land was huge amounts of oil.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, he bought this land at a ridiculously low price just for, like, farmland.
Yeah.
And so he kind of got this CBE for doing this so well.
So he was at that point, you believe, selling afterwards? Did he sell this land or let British Petroleum or something utilize this piece of land to extract the oil?
Well, what happened was he made the purchase on behalf of unknown interests. And he was meant to get a cut of this money. It was meant to be something like £500,000, which at the time, in the late 70s, was a lot of money. It was more like 4 or 5 million.
Yeah.
So yeah, he had this CBE. About 2 or 3 months after he got his CBE, he'd gone back to Nigeria and he'd actually contracted malaria. And so he came back to Surrey with the illness, and actually died quite soon after that. So he died before receiving the money for the deal, and just after getting the CBE from the Queen. And
so you found this out by basically asking around in your family of what he was doing down there?
No, not really. I found it out by looking through. My grandmother kept a huge amount of photos and cuttings from newspapers from when he was the head of sales, and he was going around the world, and he was actually on Newsnight on BBC as well.
Mm-hmm.
When he got this title as the chief, the Okakura.
Right.
And I've got some pictures of him, with the presenter on BBC on Newsnight, all in his African tribal gear. So yeah, it's a really fascinating story, and as I delved into it, as I said, I went to look through all of these photos that my grandmother had and cuttings, and I started finding all these references to Multico being connected with the royal family.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to find these pictures of my grandfather shaking hands with the Queen's husband and other sort of royal family members.
Right.
And so from that angle, then I carried on looking through these photos. There was literally thousands that I looked through over a couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
And I found everything from pictures of him at the lodge, in his local lodge in Crawley, with his white gloves and his apron, shaking hands with his friends, to pictures of him in little round mud huts in Nigeria, in Mosuga. shaking hands with the tribal chiefs with big bundles of money in his hand.
Really?
And the chiefs have all got bowler hats on and kind of English canes and stuff.
Right,
Looks
right.
like he's brought over a load of contraband for them or something.
Huh.
So I had this kind of mythological setting of my grandfather from my mother and my grandmother, which, you can understand, because they didn't really see much of it or know about much of it apart from what he told them.
Yeah.
Over the years I've realised that he may have been doing this philanthropic work, but at the same time he was exercising the power of the state, in the final sort of handover period where the British Empire had moved out. They were moving their corporations in.
So
he was a major part of this in the area.
Yeah. And I mean, when you discovered this, I don't know at the time if you were, interested, so to speak, in the more conspiratorial worldview at that point. But I mean, did your image of him kind of shatter at that point, or did you think even more, that this is really a great man? He's done wonderful things for the British Empire. What did you think about it?
Oh no, I mean, I was into the conspiratorial side of things, and I didn't really have any knowledge of Freemasonry or any of these things. But I was very political, and I was always very motivated by truth and honesty,
right,
and love for the people. And the state, whether it be the royals or a government, is always the complete opposite of that. And I understood that from a very young age. I was taught that by my parents. This completely shattered my whole image of him. And it was from that point onwards that I realised the work that he was doing, and living this double life, that my fundamental interest in Freemasonry started. Because he was the Grand Master of his lodge in Crawley. And so that was my primary thing, was an actual personal connection of my grandfather, and some of the things which I'd seen had been in operation, but I obviously understood that they weren't all of his own making.
Yeah.
That he was being ordered. So, this was about the age of 16 or 15, I kind of realised that there was a lot more going on behind the scenes with these fraternities and chivalric orders and secret societies.
Yeah.
In connection with business and state affairs,
Fascinating. So it's really what we're getting here, so to speak, is really an inside story of how the acquisition, as it were, of some of the resources are being gained, basically.
Absolutely.
Fascinating. So what happened after this point? I mean, did you continuing researching Freemasonry and how, as you mentioned, of course, that he was inducted into the Order of the Bath, and that the name there itself, of course, is a very interesting reference to the city of Bath. But maybe we shouldn't go there yet. Do you want to share some more in regards to your grandpa?
Well, I guess there's one other aspect of the story which I find absolutely fascinating, and it's kind of like the mythological aspect in a spiritual sense, because what he told my grandmother was that when he'd come back to Mosagar in Nigeria just before contracting malaria, that for about a year and a half before this point, he'd been getting cursed by the local shaman. So everybody in the tribe seemed to really like my granddad on a surface kind of exoteric level, but this shaman or this witch doctor, whatever you'd like to call him, really didn't like him. And whenever he saw him, he'd always do these little kind of dances and gestures and other things and speak to him in his native tongue. And my grandfather would always ask the locals, what's he saying? And they said, he's cursing you.
Oops.
So, he had this sort of ongoing rivalry with the shaman of this tribe.
Right.
And, he told my grandmother that just before he, when he had got back to Nigeria, just before contracting the malaria, that he'd had a very strange dream. As he was coming back to Nigeria, he used to have an escort from the tribe who would meet him from the